Ladies and gentlemen, Violent Games here. Today I wanted to talk about two of some of my favorite franchises in gaming history. Just some of the games in these franchises, just like, they're some of my favorite of all time. I am a huge fan of survival horror, and these two names right here have basically carried survival horror in pop culture for many years. I'm talking about Silent Hill and Resident Evil. Now, I feel like I might have to split this video up just a little bit into when I'm talking about these two games as franchises, because you have the classic games versus the modern games, because man, is there a big shift and a big tone difference to what has happened to the, modern games versus the classic games. So let's get into the classic games first. Let's start with the gameplay, and then we'll talk about pop culture. Now, I think as far as gameplay goes, Resident Evil just had the better package, because it's always been more about resource management, managing how much bullets you have versus how much healing items you have, gauging whether or not you can run past a zombie in a room, avoid the conflict entirely. There was a lot of that, the gameplay overall was just so much more involved, whereas Silent Hill kind of took a more silent approach, whereas there would be a lot of this ambience and build up to certain events, and then encounters would kind of go along the same way, but your character would usually be more limited in how good they were at responding to a situation. One thing that's noteworthy about both of these franchises is that the protagonists of the Resident Evil series were actually experienced combat people, right? That's not a great way to say it, but basically they're combat operatives, right? But the Silent Hill people were always inexperienced, like regular average day people. Therefore, their inability to defend themselves is actually believable and immersive. So while I think that was effective for the narrative of Silent Hill overall, the overall gameplay wasn't as intense as the Resident Evil games. The Resident Evil games kind of stood out not only as horror games, but as action games during certain points, especially for their time. Like nowadays, maybe it won't look so hype, but there were some intense moments in Resident Evil because of the gameplay. Now, as far as the narrative goes, I think Silent Hill set an industry standard at the time. The way everything was kind of an allegory, if you paid attention. It had a very Dark Souls-esque way of telling the world, and I say that, but Silent Hill actually kind of predates Dark Souls, but it has that exact same type of storytelling, that subtle storytelling, that if you pay attention, you realize that the town itself is kind of a living organism, and all the things that led up to create this town and why it's here and why it's drawn you here, things like that. Like, I really love the lore of Silent Hill, the fact that it's very mysterious, and there's just something about Silent Hill as a setting that is also very iconic. The rusty fire mills or whatever. I can't remember what kind of mill it was, or a mine or some kind of shit. There was like this rusty ass mine looking thing in Silent Hill, and then there's also the iconic fog, like that kind of stuff. Come on, Silent Hill has nailed its setting over Resident Evil, but the narrative just being so subtle, so effective, and it delivers the horror perfectly. Like, when you understand the context of like a boss battle, for example, there's a boss battle of a woman being raped in bed, and if you don't pay attention to the subtext, you wouldn't know that. But if you understand that Silent Hill is like an allegory for like the worst thing that have happened to people, then yeah, you understand it and it shocks you, and that it's horrifying. So Silent Hill, the narrative, like, actually psychologically impacts you, whereas Resident Evil is more of a jump scare based horror delivery system. So as far as horror and narrative and setting goes, Silent Hill Classic Edition has it nailed to like a perfection that I honestly don't think has been matched by any recent game. I think horror games nowadays are fucking amazing, and I would not take that for granted at any given point. I feel like people who say the classics are the only good horror games are just wrong. They're like, horror games now are scarier. I'm fucking sorry. They just are. Like, if you've played Alien Isolation on a hard difficulty, you know that these fucking games can scare the shit out of you. So with that out the way, let's talk about the progression of each series and kind of also talk about which characters were more iconic. Well, let's cover the classic characters first, because I forgot to mention. In the classic characters, everyone remembers a Resident Evil cast for some reason. I think it's because they were the first on the console. They were like the first on the PlayStation 1, I believe. And that really cemented them into the survival horror genre and made them synonymous with it. Every other game was kind of compared to Resident Evil at that point. Silent Hill kind of coming on a little bit later. Don't let me sip my coffee. But yeah, Harry Mason and Heather Mason and Harry, or what was his name? Harry? Or not Harry, what's it? Jake. James. God damn it. James Sunderland. That was his name. No one really remembers them that well, and I think I just proved that point. But there's something so iconic about the Resident Evil characters, and I think that speaks volumes about how well Capcom has marketed these characters. Like, think about how over-marketed Leon Kennedy is compared to James Sunderland or Harry Mason. You know, they aren't really sold like the Resident Evil characters. So, and I would say that continued throughout history. That doesn't really need to be said for the future as well. Like, that's just how it has been. Now, people still hold Silent Hill 2 as the best horror game of all time. That's definitely noteworthy. Where I stand on it, I definitely think the Silent Hill classic games are better than the Resident Evil games, and I would play them 9 times out of 10. However, let's talk about the future of Resident Evil and why it's just really, really amazing. So I really love the Silent Hill 1 through 3. They're actually, in my opinion, like, I have to say this before I end this, they're actually my favorite games of all time. I absolutely love them for what they are, even though they're kind of out of date at this point, let's be honest. So, moving on, Resident Evil kind of progressed as an action series. Resident Evil 4 was a very big, innovative title as well, and Leon Kennedy kind of became a staple and an icon in the survival horror industry. Almost whenever there was like an article related to survival horror, Leon would somehow be in there, like screenshotted somehow in the throughout the articles in a picture or something. Like, that's how iconic he was. And the game was remastered and put on so many different systems that the game, even to this day, is still being played, and it's a good fucking game. Then Resident Evil 5 came out. I really didn't like this game. I didn't find Sheva to be that iconic. I don't think anyone even remembers Resident Evil 5 that much, honestly, but a few people apparently enjoyed it across the community, which is weird. And then Resident Evil 6 was like a B horror movie, and I loved that game for all of the wrong reasons. Like, literally, the game was so shit, it made me laugh. That I wound up enjoying my experience with a co-op partner. I actually played through the first time with my dad, then through with my sister, and we fucking laughed our asses off. The game was just so funny with how clunky it was, how like goofy like some of the characters were, like Sherry Birkin just completely being like this cutesy little girl in like a obnoxiously over the top Michael Bay apocalypse. It's just, Resident Evil 6 was so much fun, but it wasn't like a good horror game, right? And then, finally, we have a few good things come out. We have the classic remakes of Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 0. These games are fantastic. They are remasters from the ground up. The gameplay isn't fundamentally changed, but a few modern features are added, like new control schemes. But the gameplay and the levels themselves and the style of game are all preserved like fantastically. The only thing that's upgraded is the textures. They're upgraded 1080p. These are fantastic remakes, and I am very happy that Capcom decided to release these as good as they are. Both of them, they're fantastic. I'm still playing through Resident Evil 0. That's probably the footage you're going to be seeing because I can record it in 1080. Thank God. And then Resident Evil 7 drops, guys. And oh my God, just an absolute fucking masterpiece. I thought horror was kind of going away after Alien Isolation's hype was kind of dying down. I was like, man, we really aren't getting these games. And I fully thought Resident Evil 7 would suck. I really did. I played the demo, and the demo didn't really show enough of the game to intrigue me. I thought it was a rip-off of the Silent Hill demo, which I guess we'll get into that. We'll get into that after I'm finished with this, praising modern Resident Evil. So, Resident Evil 7, I thought it was going to basically be a piece of shit. And then when I played this game, it was my game of the year. I loved that game so much. The surreal graphics of the Baker's face. Even though the game was designed for VR, it still translated as a perfect horror game, period. Like, it's an amazing game. All the environments just felt like they had so much love and attention. I think because they were smaller environments designed to be more corridor-like, it made for a better level design. And I loved the gameplay. Everything felt so freaking polished. Even the VR mode isn't that bad. Like, I have actually considered going over to my friend's house and playing through again on VR. So, Resident Evil 7 is an absolute phenomenon. It's like one of the best modern horror games ever, and it retains some of the classic feelings, including classic sound effects and the way that your character's inventory works. I love Resident Evil 7. I can't say it enough. I am so hyped for that game as a franchise. Speaking of the final nail in the coffin, as Resident Evil just being an amazing modern franchise, the Resident Evil 2 remake, it's not even a remaster like the games that I was previously talking about, which were phenomenal. This is a straight up remake. They're remaking Resident Evil 2 from the ground up, and they're styling it the way that Resident Evil 4 was. In a way, this is like the true sequel in my eyes to Resident Evil 4. Finally, we got the sequel to Resident Evil 4, and it's the Resident Evil 2 remaster, a game that I have actually never played. So I will be completely blind going into this game. I am so hyped for that game. With that being said, I am so fucking hyped, guys. You have no idea. I'm so thrilled to death that this game exists. I know it's not like Resident Evil 7, and hopefully we'll get a Resident Evil 8 that will be more like that, but how can you not be excited for that new Resident Evil game? Anyways, I've covered that enough. We need to talk about modern Silent Hill and then end the video. Basically, modern Silent Hill in 2018 doesn't exist. Konami killed it. So let's talk about the clusterfuck that was Konami's handling of Silent Hill. So first off, they get a request to make a remaster for, 1, 2, and 3. They only make it for 2 and 3. And then they actually don't have a lot of the original assets for the game, so they have to replace the voice actors in 3. And the voice actors that they, replace them are modern voice actors. They should be better. They're actually worse and don't fit the characters at all. So people immediately hate that version. Not only that, but in the new version, they decided to remove all of the fog that makes Silent Hill, that brings Silent Hill to life. The fucking fog, they removed it. So Konami is literally just trying to cash grab fans of Silent Hill. I was one of the people that got suckered into it, and oh my gosh, those remasters were so fucking horrible. I would rather have the PS2 version. Literally, I would rather buy a PS2 now and use it on an analog television than fucking play the remasters that they made. That's how bad they are. And then we got teased with the best horror game that never existed, Silent Hills, or the PT trailer. Everyone shit themselves playing this because of how horrifying it was and psychologically terrifying it was. And Konami somehow fucked up their relationship with Kojima. I don't know how. Literally. Sorry, I'm doing something else. But that was literally the most horrifying game I've ever played. And we are no longer getting it because Konami and Kojima couldn't work their shit out. God, what a fucking shame. That game, I was in a room full of women at the time. Don't ask the context. I was in a room full of women at the time. I swear I screamed louder than any of them. Holy shit, I was so fucking... when you put that headset on and you hear, all the sound effects that they're doing during that teaser... God, it's a shame they took it off the store. That's another insult to gaming history. Literally, people are selling, consoles on eBay because they have that demo installed. That's how iconic this demo was. Kojima's a freaking god at making this shit. I really wish he would have got the Silent Hill license, given to him or something, but, yeah. We can't get what we want, right? Oh, man. Talk about the best horror game never made. And that's really the end of Konami. Konami, like, has done nothing but try to, like, rape their own assets for money. They're not trying to reinvent their games. They're not trying to produce games. They shat on Hideo Kojima and then put Metal Gear into some Pachinko machine or Pachinko. I don't know what the fuck it's called. It's just such a shame. And look what Resident Evil is doing. They're alive and well because they know what their fans want. Their fans have been asking for a Resident Evil 2 remake for years, and they were making it for a long time. They heard that, and they took it to heart, and they're like, we're going to make this game a fucking masterpiece. And they were developing it for years, and look how beautiful it is. I'm so hyped. Anyways, guys, that's all I got on the Resident Evil and Silent Hill series. I really love the classic Silent Hill games on PS2 and PS1, but don't even go into the PS3 era and get that version or the version that they're doing on PS now. They're just garbage. But Silent Hill 1 through 3 had a big impact on me as a gamer. They really brought me into survival horror and showed me as a gamer why that genre is so important. I feel like it's like, I don't know why, getting over a fear in a game or going through a trauma like that, then coming out the other side gives you a certain perspective and appreciation for like everything else in life that is peaceful and good, right? I feel like that's what, you know, troubled times like that give you. And I feel like that's what Silent Hill, you know, ultimately did. It like impacted me psychologically. It made me think, and I enjoyed how deep that game was for how shallow it could appear on the surface. Anyways, Violent Games signing off. Hopefully you enjoyed this Let's Talk.